Okay, where we left off last time was we were talking about field theory and experience and the tensions within Gestalt theory about whether or not experience is relative or contextual. Now, it's importantly confusing as we're beginning to wrap our heads around these particular terms, the differences between relative and contextual. Relative privileges and singularizes experience within a given individual. Contextual anchors that experience within a given context. They're not denying that people can have varying and sometimes even unique experiences of context, but it is experiences of a context, and therefore the context itself can be a reference point to whether or not a given interpretation is authentic or not. And so the struggle is you find some Gestalt therapists, therapy theorists, writing about it very relativistically, and others writing about it contextually. And so overall, though, they tend to be far more relativist than contextual, although reading their philosophy, they should be more contextual than relativist, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So, why am I scratching your butt? You're like, come on, more scratches on my butt. Is it because that's the part of your body you can't reach, but you also can't reach the rest of your spine? So, this, for example, is an example of a contextual event. I'm not just having a subjective relative experience of this particular puppy. It's that I come from a context where dogs are tools, not beings with whom to relate, but objects to be used. And when the object no longer serves a function or purpose, then the object is thrown away. In this case, the animal would be put down. But I have met and married a woman who believes that dogs are beings with whom to relate. And so therefore I am learning to relate to these dogs. And it's a very strange experience for me to have friendly and warm feelings for animals that I was raised on a farm to take up as just tools. So, to the point where I'm actually willing to deign myself to scratch this dog's butt. Right, Boo? Like, I don't care, just keep scratching. So, yeah, the terms relative and contextual are often confused by my students, but I want to make sure that they're actually talking about different things. Contextualists are just as opposed to dogmatism as they are to relativism, and so it puts them in a kind of unique category unto themselves, that the context is a part of what is, and a part of what is part of the context. And so it's this whole simultaneous relationship. Relativists don't do that. They put all of experience within the individual. And dogmatists don't do that. They put all of experience into the object under attention, or the object of study. So one of the things that is very important to do as you're a Gestalt therapist is to really tune into and really facilitate contact with experience. And we'll talk about more that powerful word contact here in a little bit. But to really get into what is going on here and now, to really get into what's going on in the present moment, and to really dial into those particular feelings. There's another field of therapy, for example, called emotional focus therapy, and that is a thin, watered-down Gestalt therapy, where you dive into and you really just focus on the emotions going on at the moment. Whereas Gestalt therapy theory is quite complex and takes quite a lot of words to define. Emotional focus therapy just zeroes in on one part of Gestalt therapy. And there's evidence that these particular techniques work to help people really get in touch with what they're feeling. And so it begs a question, and a very important question. If I'm depressed and I'm going to my therapist, and my therapist is really helping me dial into my depression, what the hell is the point of me going to therapy? And so there are many answers to that. Let me start with the broad overarching one. It's called the paradoxical theory of change. The more you try to become something or someone that you are not, the more you will suffer. The more that you live an out-of-touch life with your experience, the way in which the rest of your life you're out of touch with will continue to dominate your feelings and your experience without you being consciously aware of it. Now, they don't make a conscious-unconscious distinction the way Freud does. Instead, for them, there's a lot of your experience you're not aware of. This has a little bit of a flavor of Alfred Adler, right? Alfred Adler defined the unconscious mind as that which is going on of which you are not aware. And so there's a lot of that going on in Gestalt therapy. One of the reasons why we do some of the exercises we do in this particular class is try to help people get in touch with all of the things that are going on with them behind the scenes. We call them assumptions, right? As well as help them get in touch with the things that are obvious and on the front of the stage, and those are beliefs. And so a lot of times, people really aren't very much in touch with their particular brand or particular set of assumptions, and those assumptions have a very powerful role in their therapy. So I try to scratch your ears, and once again you move your butt under my fingernails. Okay, why is that? Oh yeah, because it feels good, right? So, just like I like getting my back scratched too. So the struggle here is when we are endeavoring a particular way to be and we're out of touch with all of the ways of being, then we can continue to try to force ourselves in a particular direction that doesn't fit us. If we very much take up, though, and are aware of everything going on with us, then that can better help us integrate and better help become who we really are. So, years ago, there was a little boy, tiny. He came out on a football field, and he was a head, if not head and shoulders smaller than the other boys trying out for the junior high football team. And this kid, we'll call him Scotty. And Scotty is so thin with just little bird bones, and the poor kids who were in tryouts who were put up against him ended up inadvertently injuring him, even though they were trying to go light on him, because of just how small Scotty was relative to the other boys. Now, he was quick on his feet, he was fast, but anybody tackling him risked breaking him in half. And so the coaches loved his spunk, loved his attitude, loved his passion, loved his fire, but at the same time didn't know where to put him on the team. So they had to have him on the team because he's just a wonderful human being. He's just a great kid to have around. And he shows up early to every practice, leaves late, always has a positive attitude, even though there's a lot of things on the football field he can't do. And so I remember the coaches would even very carefully arrange the tackling drills. Usually you've got two lines of guys lined up this way, and the coach will hand one a ball and that one runs and the other one tackles, and they're called tackling drills. And the coaches would very carefully set it up so this little kid, Scotty, would only be tackled by the smallest kid. And even then, Scotty got hurt a lot. You know what I mean? And by the way, Scotty never complained. He'd be limping, he'd be bleeding, and he'd never complain. He's like, I'm okay, coach. Blood coming down the corner of his mouth. You know what I mean? It just, very endearing little boy. And as Scotty grew, he was like the third string kicker. So in football, there are various strings, right? There's starting, which means these are the players you have start the game. And you have first string, and those are those who are your heavy hitters who play the majority of the game. And then second string is the backup for the first string, that a first stringer is exhausted or injured, then you put in your second string guy. And then if your second string guy is exhausted or injured, you put in your third string guy. Well, Scotty was a third string kicker, and as you guys know, if you've watched American football, the kickers don't spend a lot of time on the field. And so Scotty didn't get to see much play time, but he always suited up. He was always in his tiny little pads and his tiny little jersey, and he'd be out on the field. And so by the end of junior high, he was like the captain of the football team. And so usually that's the quarterback's job, but in this case it was Scotty's. And he was like this mascot, like everybody just loved Scotty, and he'd hand out the towels, hand out the Gatorade, just really give pointers to the guys on the field as they were struggling, just very endearing. And one day, Scotty didn't show up for a game. And this is back in the corded phone days when you had to pick a phone that was plugged into a wall, right? And we didn't have cell phones back then, and Scotty didn't show up for a game. And nobody knew where he was. So called his house, looked around for him, and there was no Scotty to be found. And so after a couple of days, I just happened to call and happened to luck into his mom. And his mom was like, would you please go to the hospital? Scotty's there. He's going to hate me for telling you this, but go to the hospital. And I said, is he in trouble? She said, Scotty could use a friend right now. So I gathered up a bunch of the other guys, and we're all pretty big, burly guys. And as we go to the hospital, he was actually in the psych ward. And that was quite surprising to us because Scotty seemed very mentally healthy. And to be fair, in many ways he was. But as we walked into his room, he was curled up in the bed, and back then the rules were different. You could actually go into people's hospital rooms to visit them. And he was turned towards the door as we walked in, and then he turned away and just asked us to go away. And as we were talking, I noticed that his arms were pretty bandaged up. And we wouldn't leave. This is Scotty. He's our bro. He's the captain of the football team. Not because of athletic merit, but because of character and attitude. And so finally, Scotty sat up out of bed. We wouldn't leave after about 5 minutes. He just sat up and he just screamed at us. I'm gay, okay? You can hate me now. I'm gay. Quit pretending that you quit pretending you love me. Quit pretending that you care. Just go away. Okay. Well, here's the thing. That didn't surprise any of us. We didn't know Scotty was gay like we had figured it out, like any of us had gaydar. But Scotty was very popular with the girls in a very G-rated way, teaching girls how to braid their hair, how to match their clothes. Scotty he had great taste in shoes. He was an amazing dancer. And he would always sit and stare very longingly at the quarterback. You know what I mean? So we weren't surprised when Scotty very loudly came out of the closet at us. What did surprise us is that he thought we would hate him. Now, granted, this is in the 80s, right? And there's been a lot of work in this particular culture around loving and accepting people across sexual orientations. But I later learned, of course, we didn't leave, and Scotty's still our bro. And what I learned, though, is Scotty kept trying to live the heterosexual life. He would try to make out with girls, and apparently he was a really good kisser, but his heart was never in it. You know what I mean? To the point where the girls could pick up on it. And he kept trying to, he was a member of a particular religion that sends boys on missions or requests boys to go on evangelical 2-year missions. And the presumption is that you're straight and chaste when you go. Well, Scotty was chaste, but he wasn't straight. So the more Scotty kept trying to be somebody he wasn't, the more and more it was poisoning him, the more and more it was killing him, and it resulted in a suicide attempt. Now, this story has a happy ending. Scotty did get married in his mid-20s. He's married to a young, well, I guess they're not young anymore, they're my age, but a lovely man, and his life's been rough and easy and everything just like everybody else's. And so one of the things that the paradoxical theory of change allows us to do is to take ownership for our own being, to really get in touch with who and what we are. And the more we accept it, the more it allows us to change in a way that is true to us. Now, that word true, I don't mean it dogmatically. I mean it contextually. The way in which within this context, this is how I can grow. I think of the paradoxical theory of change when I'm hiking up the top of some of these mountains, where you'll come across a tree that seems to be growing straight out of rock. So right there on the tree line, there'll be like a pine tree or a scrub oak or something. And as you get closer to the tree and you begin to look at how it's grown, its roots follow the cracks of the stone where the dust and soil has settled in those cracks, and that's what the tree is anchored into. And so now, granted, it also slowly cracks the stone. So if the tree, if that seed planted and said, nope, I'm going to grow the way I want to grow, and I'm going to grow irrespective of context, and I'm just going to be only in touch with the way those other trees say I should grow, that tree's going to die. But if the tree gets in touch with what is available to it, in touch with the rock that it is in, and in touch with the urge of its roots to grow, new possibilities for growth will occur, presuming the tree has a human-like intelligence. But I'm hoping you get where I come from. Think of all the people who, by acknowledging, embracing, and accepting who they were, or who they are, and acknowledging, embracing, and accepting the context that they are in, thrive once they find those cracks in the context, once they find how it is that they can grow into the space that they are given. The other thing is it allows us to change our space. So as I'm sitting and I'm counseling somebody and they're talking repeatedly to me about how wonderful their relationship is with their lover, and I'm not asking, why are they telling me? You know what I mean? Maybe they're just celebrating, and that's great. I'm not saying, referring to their lover with terms of endearment or complimenting them. That's not what I mean. But like, Dr. Draper, you need to really understand how awesome my girlfriend is. Like, she is just the best girlfriend. Cool. That may be the case, right? It may be genuine. But the second time, okay, girlfriend's still great. The third time, now it's gotten a little interesting. So there's something that I call Draper's Rule of Threes. Now, it's not relative to any one of these theories in particular, although it tends to lend itself to more fourth dimensional theories. And that is, when clients bring up something 3 times that is a non sequitur or not really on topic, or it doesn't really fit what's going on, then there's something there that's bugging them. And what the Gestalt therapists offer is that a solution to that is help them get in touch with all of what they're feeling in the present moment. Now, again, other theorists would have other solutions on what to do when the rule of 3 pops up. But as future therapists, just let them give you that handy little litmus test, the rule of 3. So, the paradoxical theory of change is the more we embrace who we are and the context we're in, the more we can find ways to grow within that context. Now, and of course thereby changing the context. We need to, though, really engage with what is, though, before we can change. So in Christian therapy, they have this word repent that they use, and they don't call their clients unto repentance. It's not a shamey, guilty thing. In fact, it's a very loving and relational process. So with Christian therapists, what they do is they help turn people's heads. Because if you remember your New Testament studies or your biblical history class, to sin means to turn away. Repent means to turn towards. And so I'm sinning if I'm turned away from you, right? That might be ignoring you or objectifying you or blaming you or shaming you. Where I'm turned away from who you are as a person, I'm sinning against you, right? And sometimes this can lead to violence, physical violence, sexual violence, verbal violence. Because if you're just an object to me, then I can treat you however I'm going to treat you. But if I really repent and really turn towards you and really experience you as a person, I'm a lot less likely to sin against you. What does that have to do with the paradoxical theory of change? Well, the answer is everything. And this is a very powerful technique that various of these theories, like Christian therapists do it, Buddhist therapists do it, Gestalt therapists do it a lot, is they really get into what it is that the client is experiencing. Okay? But not in a way where they are then going to apply a heavy technique to make the client change. They notice, though, that clients are more open when they're in touch with their experience. Now, many people don't want to get in touch with all of their experience all at once. We use a lot of things to keep ourselves distracted from what's going on with us. So, thinking of a client right now I'm consulting about, and it's another rehab romance. So rehab romances are where I'm in a residential treatment center, and in these group therapies, a lot of intimate things come up, and there's a lot of intimate sharing and caring. And so that often leads to romance, romantic feelings. rehab romances are an extremely bad idea. They correlate very strongly with relapse. When you've got one person with issues of addiction and they're now crushing on and having sex with and living with somebody else who has issues of addiction, that doesn't predict sobriety for either of them. Rehab romances are a really bad idea, so much so that many, if not, well, most treatment centers, whether they're inpatient or intensive outpatient, actively say, these are not the people you are dating. The people in group, do not date them. These are like siblings. Don't date family. We're not in Arkansas, right? You don't date family. And so, I'm sorry for those of you from Arkansas. So, there's I guess we could pick on West Virginia. Everybody picks on West Virginia. So, there's a young lady in a rehab romance, and her boyfriend is 10 years older than her, and he is and she's a young gal, and he's not as young, and he always needs to know where she is. If she's texting, then she's texting somebody else to have an affair with them in his eyes, and he accuses her of such. If she goes anywhere without him knowing where she's going, then she is going somewhere to cheat on him, and he gets very verbally abusive and calls her all sorts of filthy, horrible names. And so that is a topic of therapy regularly. So she came to our particular outpatient program from an inpatient program, and that's where she struck up the relationship. And so she's not dating anybody in our current treatment center, or we would refer one or both of them out. Instead, she's dating somebody at another intensive outpatient treatment while she's in ours. So this relationship is a major theme of therapy. And what's really fun to watch is the way in which her therapists are all over that relationship. He's toxic for you, you need to leave him, he's so bad for you. And the therapists are right. He's a piece of shit. At the same time, though, the more and more they talk to her about what a piece of shit he is, the more she keeps arguing, you don't understand, he's so nice, he's just the best, I love him. Oh, I hate those words. When a client says, but I love him, I know there's no therapy that can be done, right? It just shuts you down because you can't argue against love. Bullshit.
That which
you totally can. You strengthen that which you oppose. And so I'm working with my colleagues and I say, you need to stop downing the boyfriend because she'll just up him again. And that reinforces her love and her obsession and her terrible boundaries with him. So my fellow therapists have had themselves to engage in the paradoxical theory of change. The more they look at why legitimately and validly she has a crush on this guy and highlight that when he is kind, he is super kind. Nobody does roses and chocolates and dancing and poetry and passionate lovemaking like this guy, right? They keep overlooking and blinding themselves to all the good things that he's doing, why a girl much younger than him would have such a raging crush on him. When they started to validate that and started to really get in the experience of her loving him and wanting him and feeling spoiled by him at times, the more she began to talk about what a piece of shit he is. Okay, it's a paradoxical theory of change, that the more we embrace what is, the more possibilities for change happen. And so if you want somebody to turn back towards you, validate them, right? If they're not seeing things from your point of view, if they're, oh, Trump's the best president of all, or Obama is the best president we've ever had, whatever position they have that disagrees with yours, if you start by telling them they're wrong, they're still sinned. They're still turned away because they're looking at how right they are. But if you begin to validate certain of their points, and they begin to look at you because you're validating them, then there's repentance going on. And the two of you can have a conversation if it's going to happen at all. Not to say they always happen. But by really getting into the mud with somebody, really seeing things, or appreciating that they're seeing things from one point of view, and validating that experience, the more they're likely to be open to other possibilities. So this happens in political debates, it happens in moral debates, and, of course, therapy. So the more you get in, James is thinking of some stories of what he's been doing with the boys at Telos, right? Mm-hmm. That's a residential treatment center near here. That by getting in the mud with the boys, you can slowly help them change what they're looking at. So you were telling me a story about that just the other day.
Yep.
So one of the things that Gestalt therapists acknowledge is that our bodies, which they take up as whole context, is a field unto itself. They don't do the mind-body split. They're not Cartesian dualists like so many of the other theorists in psychology. Instead,
they're holistic, aren't they?
Huh?
Gestalt therapists are holistic.
Extremely.
They look at everything.
Yep. So therefore, they take up your whole self as body and soul inseparably. Your body is your soul and your soul is your body in a non-reductive, non-reducible way. They're not reductionists and they're not determinists.
Mm-hmm.
So they argue for a process that they call organismic self-regulation, and it looks a lot like Rogers' organismic valuing process. There's some very interesting similarities there between the Gestalt OSR and Rogers OVP. So organismic valuing process, organismic self-regulation. So on the organismic self-regulation side, when we really get in touch with and know and own what our experience is, then we begin to identify with what we sense, feel, emote, observe, need, want, and believe. True growth starts with conscious awareness of our experience, both in terms of how people affect us as well as how we affect others. This growth is furthered by being in contact with what is really happening and being honest with yourself about what you will do within this context and what you don't. So it's very interesting that that whole context that they're saying is tune into yourself. There is a practice in psychotherapy called self of the therapist as instrument. Okay, self of the therapist as an instrument. That means if you are practicing getting in touch with you and staying in touch with other people, that how your body is responding is a part of the context of what's going on. And if you begin to pay attention to that, you begin to have avenues for treatment, for engagement that you wouldn't have before. For example, a colleague of mine is a brilliant Gestalt therapist. She was the director of clinical training at Loma Linda University in California, Barbara Hernandez, and she does this beautifully. Watching her work is inspiring. So she and I were colleagues back at Indiana State, and she taught me a few very strong, very powerful, emotional, important lessons about the self as instrument. And I began to try to apply that and to fit it within my theoretical orientation. And here's something I learned, and that is when a particular client of mine would come in and he would talk about certain phenomena, even though he was talking about it in a very prosaic, calm tone of voice, I would start to feel a little yucky in my colon. You know what I mean? Like it'd feel like, ugh, like a little tight, a little anxious, a little frustrated. And so that happened several times, again, the rule of threes. And finally I just stopped him and I said, every time you talk about your mom, I get this yucky feeling. You're not saying anything bad about her. I'm sure your mom's a lovely human being. But I'm wondering what's going on that I feel stress and tension when you talk about your mother. Now, it could be on me, right? Maybe it's something going on with me. At the same time, though, what that allowed us to uncover is that he has incredibly deep ambivalent feelings about his mother. It turned out their relationship was far more codependent than what he let on. And so they talk every day. They talk for an hour every day. Jeez. Mom is his drug, meaning that anytime that he has emotions that he doesn't like, what does he do? He calls mommy. And for somebody in their early 30s, that's a little odd and not necessarily healthy. But what that also meant is anytime mom was not emotionally available, he had no one else to regulate his emotions for him. And so he would be unregulated. But he loves mommy and doesn't want to feel resentment for mommy. So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a Gestalt analysis of what's going on. But self as instrument gets back into you are organismically self-regulating, and so is the client. The trick is as a therapist, you have practiced being open to experience. Okay, being in touch with what's going on in the here and now. So we're working against our organismic self-regulation if we're living in the should be, might be, better be, because it distracts from the immediate experience and happens growth. If you're not aware of where you are, you're elsewhere, and that can create certain problems. So some of the aims of Gestalt therapy is self-knowledge, self-acceptance, and growth by immersion in current existence, aligning awareness and experimenting with what is actually happening in the moment. So that's a lot that they're trying to accomplish. So self-knowledge. I know what my assumptions and beliefs are. I know how I think, I know how I feel. Self-acceptance is I'm okay with what's going on with me. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful, I get that this is a part of my experience. Growth by immersion in current existence. The cracks in the soil of cracks in the rocks of what we are given. That, let's say I have a difficult relationship with an employer. How do I grow into that particular relationship given that it is what it is and I've experienced it at the same time? So one of my employers he and I had very, very different philosophical positions. So much so that I often see us working at contrary ends. And by accepting that I am a rock for his roots and he's a rock for my roots, how it is that I can grow into the experience of working with him in these particular ways. And I like that Gestalt therapists would advise me to do that because it's working out quite nicely. I'm genuinely fond of this fellow. So growth by immersion in current existence. So by really getting into where you're at and what's going on and not living in the future or living in the past, but instead being in the present moment, that allows possibilities that there wouldn't be otherwise. And the Gestalt therapists aren't going to tell you that these possibilities are easy or that life is simple and good when you do that. Instead, it's growth is painful and can be painful, and that's okay because that's growth. And a lot of our life is growing pains. So, so much to cover in so little time. Okay. What they're aiming for looks a lot like Roger's therapized individual. So hopefully those notes are on files on Canvas, but open to experience, existential living, etc. The difference, though, between Gestalt therapy and Roger's is that the Gestalt therapist will very much see your growing as growing into a context, not growing in a vacuum. Right? The context within which you grow changes the shape of how you grow. Like a good Gestalt therapy example, in Japan, there's some stores that sell square watermelons. Okay, it's pretty handy because square watermelons stack much better than round watermelons do. So you can get a lot more watermelonness in the same space that you could round watermelons. Well, why are they square? It's because when the watermelons first bud, somebody clamps a box around the vine. And so as the watermelon grows, it grows into the shape of that box. And then they pull the box off and now you have a nice square watermelon. So we grow into the context that we are given, and it helps shape who we are. Now, Gestalt therapists at the same time, though, are sometimes saying sometimes you need to burst the box, right? That context is not destiny or necessity. So they're not going to say that's easy, though. So one of the things that if you're interested in Gestalt therapy, I would ask you to do is start thinking about how you're a watermelon in what shape is your box. What boxes have you had to blow open to grow into a shape that didn't hurt or didn't constrain as much? And in what ways are you just a square watermelon? How have you grown into context and still grown? You might be a lovely, juicy watermelon within the context that you are given. And so, to what degree do you fit that context and to what degree don't you? Because to a Gestalt therapist, you're just a square watermelon in some ways, and in other ways, you're not. You've exceeded the bounds, and in some ways, nobody ever put a box on you. And so you've been able to take whatever shape your natural watermelon takes. So thank you for being patient with this particular crude metaphor. We grow within particular contexts, and when we get in touch with the context, that provides new avenues for growth. The other thing is, it turns out very few boxes are completely sealed. All of them have gaps and all of them have cracks that we could grow out of and through. So, okay. So how do you do this self-knowledge, self-acceptance, aligning awareness with context, experimenting with context? And that's through the process of contact, okay? So contact is getting in touch with what is emerging right here, right now, moment by moment, and actually experiencing it deeply. It's like practicing mindfulness from a Buddhist frame, that rather than being all up in your head, with your head chattering away about all these, obligations, demands, ideas, etc., of instead really getting in touch with what's going on. Your butt in a chair, whereas if you're walking and listening to me on YouTube, that you get in contact with where it is you're at and what it is you're really doing. I've shared this before, I'm going to share it again. When you're in bed, why are you feeling anxious? Well, because I got 1,000,001 problems, right? Of course you do. But laying in bed isn't one of them. So one of the things that can be very therapeutic to teach people is how to be in bed. And it's a skill they can master by being in contact with the sheets, the mattress, the pillow, the blankets, to be really in touch with the fact they're in a soft, warm, very safe space, and that final exam isn't in bed with them. Their bastard of an ex isn't in bed with them right now. That thing they're afraid of isn't in bed with them right now. And instead they're just laying in bed, and it's comfy and warm and nice. And so really getting in contact with that. And so what does this have to do with anything? Well, it has a lot to do with relationships. One of the things that is poison for a relationship is resentment. As a couples counselor, I've watched, oh boy, I've sat and I've watched a member of a couple, the husband and wife, or the husband and wife or the wife, and somebody will bring up something that the other person said from years ago as they're arguing on my couch. And I time them out and I say, when did that happen? When did so-and-so say that really painful thing? And, oh, it's been 3 years ago. And you're still holding on to it? And that's still poisoning your relationship? So one of the things to get in contact with is what's actually going on in the moment. What's going on in the moment isn't the thing that he said 3 years ago. What's going on in the moment is the two of you are arguing about where to go for dinner. Be in contact with what is going on. And that gives possibilities that are more valuable from a Gestalt therapy frame and provide more growth than holding something that's not really going on, something that he said 3 years ago, and being upset now 3 years later as you're arguing about where to go to eat. And that's part of your anger, even though that's not what's going on. And so contact. So contact goes from eating a meal, lying in bed, talking to a friend, getting in a fight with a lover. For you who are interested in Gestalt therapy, staying in contact with the client. And that's hard to do. The adult attention span starts to get strained at about 15 to 20 minutes. And this is a healthy, normal adult attention span. And by 45 minutes, a healthy adult attention span is tapping out. It's on the mat going, oh, let me have a break. And so we do things to chemically alter or force ourselves to alter that, right? So trying to stay in contact with a client for 50 minutes, or if you're doing groups, an hour and a half, that can be pretty taxing. Doing therapy can be very tiring. So, so there's contact. That's when we're letting ourselves feel and experience what's going on. Conscious awareness is, it's like a deepening of contact, or a different form of contact. So conscious awareness is where we can articulate of what we're aware of and how. It's more of the analytic part of us, where we are not psychoanalytic, but analytic. We're analyzing what's going on. We're consciously aware of this, and this, and we have thoughts about it. It's now adding thinking to the feeling. And then if we're in contact and we're consciously aware of what's going on, then we can broaden our awareness or deepen our awareness. Awareness in Gestalt therapy theory is our focused attention to a situation that we have conscious awareness of, meaning that we are focused, we're deliberately focused on a situation, we're deliberately focused on a given part of our context, we can articulate what's going on, etc. And then we can really broaden our awareness of it. We can really get deep in, okay, so this is what I'm aware of, I can articulate it, I'm going to really focus it and let that experience unfold for me. So at the same time I was learning these lessons from Dr. Hernandez, a friend of mine comes over and he goes, hey, I have a friend and he's military and he shoots guns and you shoot guns, so therefore you two will be fast friends. I'm like, oh man, this happened. I've got so many stories that start with that conversation, and not very many of them are pleasant. So I was a little bit guarded, and sure enough, a few weeks later we have another barbecue at my house, and this friend of mine brings over his friend that is into guns and is a military guy. So I meet them on the porch, and my doorbell dings, and I open up my porch, and there's my friend John and his friend BJ. Now, I'm 6.5 feet tall. I weigh about 300 pounds. BJ is 5'4", maybe a $120. He's like literally a third my size. And BJ looks at me. He's got his blonde crew cut. He's wearing a wife beater shirt and camouflage pants and boots. And he looks me from my toes up to the top of my head, and he goes, "I could kick your ass." So I'm looking down at this little guy, and I go, "Yep. How do you like your burger? Medium, medium well, medium rare?" And I'm not going to have this fight, right? I'm not going to have this conversation with him. So that threw him for a loop. And he several times throughout the next hour, as we're trying to have a barbecue, trying to have dinner, he brings up how he's smarter than me, he's faster than me, he's stronger than me. And he's not doing that with anybody else but me. You know what I mean? There's 30 people at this barbecue, but he would come around and make a point to other people about how he's smarter, faster, stronger than me. And it was very odd, right? It's kind of strange behavior that you would do this to make the target of your aggression the host of a barbecue, right? So after about an hour of this, I will admit I started to get a little impatient. And I had this image of me grabbing him by his scrawny little throat, picking him off the ground, and squeezing him until his eyes burst, right? That wanting to strangle somebody. So at the same time, though, I got Dr. Hernandez, who's teaching me about contact, conscious awareness, deepening awareness, those kinds of things. So I thought, oh, this will be a great time to practice this. So contact. So I'm not actually in contact with BJ, right? I have a surface level awareness of him. I have a surface level awareness of the wife beater shirt, the camouflage pants. He's peacocking, right? He's strutting around the barbecue. But I don't know him as a person, so my contact with him is very thin. And I will admit, I didn't want to get to know him as a person. So conscious awareness, I'm consciously aware of he's strutting, he's peacocking, but conscious awareness also means I need to be consciously aware of what's going on with me, right? Where I'm feeling attacked, I'm feeling taken for granted, I'm feeling like he's not sufficiently grateful for the fact I'm hosting a big barbecue that he's invited to. I'm frustrated with his expressions of aggression against me and comparison. And so as I really got into that, so he's doing these things and I'm having this experience, and both are happening at once, right? It is what it is and what I'm making of it at the same time. And so I realized, okay, through this process, I need to get in deeper contact with BJ. And I didn't want to. He was acting like a little asshole. So what I did, though, is I went and I started talking to him and fluffing up his ego. It works every time. If you got somebody peacocking around you, strutting and talking about how wonderful they are, talk to them about how wonderful they are, and they'll tell you even more. And so I learned a whole lot about him. And it turned out he could be a little asshole, but at the same time, though, he was a rather remarkable human being in some way. I didn't desire at that point to be his friend ever again, or to be his friend at all. But the more I availed myself to try to get in contact with him, and it was struggle, it wasn't easy, the less and less he peacocked around me, strutting in comparison, and the more and more I saw he's a very interesting, passionate, strong, creative person, to the point where our relationship changed over about 5 years to where I genuinely admired him, right? That there were a lot of things about him, a lot of strengths of character that I didn't see before. And not to say that the comparison and the verbal aggression was ever okay, but I began to learn about his horrible abuse as a child, the way he was really shamed and abused and everything else, and the way in which his aggressive style is a way to keep people who can abuse him in their place so they don't abuse him.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, is it seemed like the power of threes was taking effect, and there was something, he was probably actually intimidated by you.
Or protecting himself against other people, because by putting me down, he's simultaneously showing all the other people who could abuse him.
The metaphorical picking a fight with the biggest man in the prison yard.
Exactly, and that's what he did. Of course, I didn't fight with him, thankfully. So these feelings of anxiety, distant anger, aggression that I was experiencing all could be focused on, and I could see the limits of my contact, where they are and where they're not. That allowed me to ask different questions in different ways than if I just absorbed myself in my own feelings and didn't get in contact with him and what's going on, deeper contact. So contact is just getting in touch with. Conscious awareness is when you start to really think about what you're contacting, and then awareness is all of the shape of that particular context and how you're a part of it, they're a part of it, what's going on, what isn't, etc. So that's entirely too brief an explanation of this very complicated process. At the same time, though, the process is actually very simple. And you'll find that people who have open attitudes towards life and open attitudes towards other often do this habitually. In fact, they're like, oh, that's what I've been doing for years. I didn't even know that there were terms for it. You know, I just own my reactions, where my reactions are coming from. I see what's going on with them, and I try to figure out how to bridge those two. So, likewise, I've noticed Gestalt therapists do this in therapy a lot. That if they're frustrated by a client, they're going to ask themselves, why am I frustrated? What's neat, though, is they don't self-blame. Oh, there must be something wrong with me that I'm frustrated with the client. No. The feeling of frustration is valuable data to them. That if they're frustrated, it could be that other people are frustrated too. And if nobody else is frustrated with the client, and only the therapist is, then the therapist gets to ask, why am I the only one frustrated with this guy? Right? What's going on with me that I have these particular sensitivities? Or what's going on with me that I have these particular proclivities? Or what's going on that he treats me differently than everybody else? Right? But if you're not in contact with those and practicing conscious awareness and deepening awareness, then you won't necessarily get to those places. It's just, yeah, my 3 o'clock's an asshole. I really hate meeting with that guy. A Gestalt therapist would go, what are you in contact with? What are you aware of? You know what I mean? Like for them, this would be, ooh, there's data here we could mine.
Why? Yeah. Why is he an asshole?
Is he an asshole just with you? In what ways do you mean an asshole? Why does it stress you out that he's an asshole? You know, why are you taking him personally? What's going on with you? What's going on with him that he might be trying to make it personal? So it's really fun the way they do that. It's like, ooh, this is neat. There's data here to play with.
The Gestalt therapist looks at it like it's a shiny thing.
Exactly, and they want to get in the mud and play with it. Look at this shiny thing. Ooh, you're frustrated. This is cool. You know what I mean? Your frustration isn't a bad thing. Your frustration isn't a good thing. Your frustration is an interesting thing. It's data. It's useful. Thank you. And so it was really meaningful sitting and consulting with Dr. Hernandez about my cases, because whatever I was going through, whatever the client was going through, for her it was like, oh, you know, it was data. Like, this is interesting. There's possibilities here. So one of the things that you get to do as a Gestalt therapist is experiment. And what they mean by experiment is very different than what an empiricist means by experiment. So the root of experiment is the Latin expiere, right? It means experience. Experience and experiment are synonymous. When we use the term experiment in research psychology, we've detached the word experiment from its roots, and now we say we're only going to experience what we control using our scientific method to experience, meaning it's going to be, we're going to remove confounds, you know, do a cause-effect study. They've really detached experience from its roots, whereas Gestalt therapists are more authentic to the roots of that word. And so you can experiment with what's going on for you in a given relationship at a given time. So as you try to further and deepen your awareness, you're trying to experience what's going on, or trying to experience something new within what's going on. So you may be doing something that you're not aware of. You may be doing something emotionally, habitually, and you're not aware that you're doing something habitually. And so one of the things that you get to do is experiment on yourself. And I can just see some of you are going to tell your bishop, well, Dr. Draper said I could experiment on myself. Sure, throw me under that bus. So you can do a cognitive exercise. This isn't cognitive behavioral therapy. Don't bring that. Cognitive means a thinking exercise. A thinking exercise of if I have this particular problem, what happens and what changes if I think about it in these other ways? If I interpret the same issue, if I utilize my conscious awareness in this other way. And so, likewise, when you are in relation to somebody else, you can experiment not with them as an object, but with them as a person. Like, my favorite kind of dating is shut down right now, and it's dinner, dancing, and a movie. And those aren't possible for us at this particular moment. And so my sweetie and I have been experimenting with other ways to hang out and spend time together. So let's pause for now. We'll do our third unit and finish up Gestalt therapy during our next monologue. Thank you, James, for being here and helping. It makes my job a lot easier. So I will see you guys next time.